Chains bit into Elena's wrists as two guards shoved her forward through the stone corridor, her bare feet slapping against cold, wet floor. She did not scream. She did not beg. She only walked, spine straight, eyes forward, while torchlight flickered against damp walls, and the smell of rust and old fear filled her lungs. "Move faster," the taller guard snapped, yanking the chain so hard she stumbled into the wall. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she caught herself before she fell. She would not give them the satisfaction of watching her crumble. She barely fought back at the border, the second guard muttered to his companion. Strange for someone caught sneaking so close to the palace gates. "Wolfless," the first guard said, as if that single word explained everything. No wolf, no fight. Just a scared little human playing spy games in wolf territory. Elena said nothing. Let them believe whatever made them comfortable. The truth sat buried so deep inside her that even she sometimes doubted it existed at all. They reached an iron door at the end of the corridor. One guard produced a heavy key, and the door groaned open to reveal a narrow cell, empty except for a thin layer of straw on the floor, and a single high window too small for anyone to climb through. The guards shoved her inside without ceremony. The chains came off her wrists, but the cold metal was quickly replaced by an iron collar clasped around her neck. Humming faintly with some kind of suppressive magic, she could feel pressing against her skin like static. "That collar keeps troublemakers calm," the taller guard said with a smirk. "Not that you'd need it. Wolfless girls don't cause much trouble." The door slammed shut. Footsteps faded down the corridor. Elena sank to the floor, pressing her back against the cold stone wall, and finally allowed herself one long, shaking breath. She had been so close to the archive room where the old records were kept, where she hoped to find even a fragment of information about her parents, about the night she was taken from them as an infant, about why she had been hidden across a dozen towns for 23 years. Instead, a routine patrol had caught her scaling the outer garden wall, and now she sat in the dungeon of the very kingdom she had spent her whole life running from. A voice broke the silence. "You're new." Elena turned toward the sound. In the cell across the narrow corridor, an old woman sat cross-legged on a thin blanket, silver hair braided over one shoulder, sharp eyes catching what little light filtered through the high windows. Despite her surroundings, she looked entirely unbothered, almost amused. "I'm Mabel," the old woman said, "and you, my dear, are radiating something the guards clearly did not notice." Elena frowned. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't." Mabel's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Not yet." Before Elena could ask what that meant, heavy boots echoed down the corridor again, moving with far more authority than the guards who had brought her in. Every prisoner in the row of cells fell silent. Even Mabel straightened slightly, though her expression remained calm. A tall figure appeared at the end of the corridor, flanked by two guards who kept a careful half-step behind him. He wore no crown, no ceremonial robes, only a simple black coat over dark clothing, yet every line of his posture radiated command. His dark hair was cut short, his jaw sharp, and his eyes, when they finally landed on Elena's cell, were an unsettling shade of amber that seemed to catch the torchlight like a wolf's. King Draven Ashvale did not need a crown to be recognized. The entire dungeon seemed to hold its breath around him. He stopped in front of Elena's cell and studied her, the way a man studies a puzzle piece that does not belong in the picture. "You're the one caught at the garden wall." It was not a question, so Elena did not answer it as one. She simply held his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to lower her eyes the way she suspected he expected her to. Something flickered across his face, brief and almost imperceptible, gone before she could name it. "Most people look at the floor when I speak to them," he said. "I'm not most people," Elena replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. A low sound rumbled in his chest, something between a laugh and a growl. "No," he said slowly, "I don't suppose you are." He crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to her eye level, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Wolfless," he said, reading the word from whatever report the guards had filed. "And yet you climbed a 12-foot wall, guarded by shifted sentries, without setting off a single alarm, until the last moment. That's not the skill of someone with no instincts at all." "Maybe I'm just good at climbing," Elena said. "Maybe." He did not sound convinced. His eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary, and Elena felt an odd, prickling awareness crawl across her skin, as if something inside her recognized something inside him. She pushed the feeling down immediately. It made no sense. She had no wolf. She had nothing to recognize. Draven straightened, breaking whatever strange thread had stretched between them. "Keep her separate from the others," he told the guards. "I want her watched." "Yes, Your Majesty," one guard replied. He turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at her one final time. "What's your name?" She considered refusing to answer, but something told her defiance for its own sake would gain her nothing here. "Elena. Elena," he repeated, as if testing the shape of it. Then he walked away, boots echoing down the corridor, until silence swallowed the sound completely. The moment he was gone, Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were trembling, though she couldn't say if it was fear or something else entirely. "Interesting," Mabel said from across the corridor, watching her with renewed curiosity. "What's interesting?" Elena asked, still shaken. "The Alpha King doesn't linger in the dungeons," Mabel said. "He sends guards to handle prisoners. He does not walk down here himself, and he certainly does not crouch to speak with wolfless girls caught sneaking around his gardens." She tilted her head, yet here he was, staring at you like he'd seen a ghost. Elena wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to ignore the strange warmth still lingering where his gaze had touched her skin. "I don't know what he saw. I'm nobody." Mabel's eyes softened, though her voice remained firm. "My dear, in 20 years of watching wolves come and go through these halls, I have never once seen an Alpha King look at anyone the way he just looked at you. Whatever you believe about yourself, I would start questioning it." The words settled uneasily in Elena's chest, stirring something she had spent her entire life trying to bury. Hours passed in near silence, broken only by the distant drip of water, somewhere deeper in the dungeon, and the occasional cough from prisoners in far cells. Elena tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, fragments of strange images flickered behind her eyelids. A forest bathed in silver moonlight, a woman's voice singing softly, in a language she didn't recognize but somehow understood. A crown resting on a pillow of dark fur. She jerked awake each time, heart pounding, sweat beading on her forehead despite the dungeon's chill. "Nightmares?" Mabel asked quietly during one of these moments, having apparently been awake the whole time. "I don't know what they are," Elena admitted, rubbing her eyes. "They started a few years ago. Always the same forest. Always that song." Mabel's expression grew serious. All traces of amusement vanished. "Tell me exactly what you see." Elena hesitated, unused to sharing something so private with a stranger, but there was something steady and trustworthy in the old woman's gaze. She described the forest, the moonlight, the melody she could never quite place, and the crown resting on fur so dark it seemed to swallow light itself. When she finished, Mabel was quiet for a long moment. "Where were you born, child?" "I don't know," Elena said. "I was raised by different guardians in different towns. They always said it wasn't safe to stay anywhere too long. I never understood why." "And your parents?" "I don't remember them at all. I was told they died when I was very young." Elena's voice cracked slightly on the last words, old grief resurfacing despite years of practice keeping it buried. Mabel studied her with an expression Elena couldn't quite read, something between pity and awe. "I think," the old woman said carefully, "that you have been lied to your entire life, and not out of cruelty, but out of desperate protection." "Protection from what?" "From people like the ones who put that collar around your neck," Mabel said, nodding toward the iron band still humming faintly against Elena's skin. "That collar is not standard prisoner equipment. It's designed for one purpose only, to suppress a wolf." Elena's breath caught. "I don't have a wolf. I'm wolfless." "Are you certain of that?" Mabel asked softly. "Or were you simply told it so many times that you stopped questioning it?" The question hit harder than Elena expected, cracking something loose in her chest that she had spent years keeping sealed. She opened her mouth to argue, to insist that of course she knew what she was, but no words came. Instead, a strange warmth pulsed beneath her ribs, faint but unmistakable, like an ember stirring after years of dormancy. Before she could process the sensation, footsteps echoed down the corridor again, faster this time, urgent. A young guard rushed past the cells, calling for reinforcements, his voice tight with alarm. "What's happening?" Elena asked, pressing herself against the bars. Mabel's expression sharpened, all traces of calm replaced by tension. "Trouble," she said simply. "The kind that finds wolves who have secrets they don't yet understand." Somewhere above them, muffled by stone and distance, the unmistakable sound of a horn split the air, followed by shouting, followed by the distant clash of something that sounded very much like the beginning of a fight. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs, that strange warmth beneath them growing steadily brighter, as if something inside her was waking up and did not intend to go back to sleep. For the first time since the guards dragged her into this dungeon, Elena was not afraid of what waited outside her cell. She was afraid of what might be waking up inside her instead. The shouting grew louder. Somewhere above, glass shattered, and a new smell drifted down through the corridor, sharp and metallic, one that even a wolfless human could recognize as danger. Mabel's eyes met hers through the bars separating their cells, steady despite the growing chaos. "Whatever happens next," the old woman said quietly, "do not fight what you feel inside you. Not this time." Before Elena could ask what she meant, the dungeon door at the end of the corridor burst open with a violent crash, and the true danger of that night finally revealed itself. Masked figures poured into the corridor, at least 6 of them, moving with the swift, coordinated precision of trained fighters rather than common thieves. They wore dark leather armor stitched with a symbol Elena didn't recognize, a broken circle split by a jagged line. The lead figure, a broad-shouldered man with cold gray eyes visible through his mask, scanned the cells with methodical purpose, as if searching for something specific rather than attacking at random. "Where is she?" he demanded, voice muffled but sharp with impatience. One of his companions checked a piece of parchment, then pointed toward Elena's cell. "There, cell 14. Elena's stomach dropped. They knew exactly where to find her. This was not a random dungeon raid. This was a planned attack, and she was the target. "Elena Voss," the lead man said, stepping closer to the bars, studying her with an expression that mixed satisfaction with something colder, something that made her skin crawl. "We've been searching for you for a very long time." "You have the wrong person," Elena said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the fear clawing up her throat. "I'm nobody, just a wolfless prisoner." The man laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Wolfless, that's the story they gave you, is it? Clever. Keep the bloodline hidden, by convincing the girl herself she has nothing worth hiding." "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer. Instead, he nodded to 2 of his companions, who produced a heavy iron key that should not have existed for these cells, and began working the lock with practiced efficiency. Mabel's voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding despite her cell separating her from the danger. "Leave her be. Whatever quarrel you have with the throne, this girl is not part of it." The lead man barely glanced at her. "Old woman, you have no idea what this girl is part of." The lock clicked open. 2 guards descended on Elena before she could react, gripping her arms and hauling her out of the cell despite her struggle. She twisted against their grip, adrenaline surging through her, and felt that strange warmth beneath her ribs flare hotter, brighter, more insistent than ever before. "Let go of me," she snapped, her voice carrying an edge she didn't recognize as her own, something low and resonant that seemed to vibrate through the stone walls themselves. For a fraction of a second, both guards holding her flinched, their grip loosening just slightly, as if her words had physically pushed against them. Elena felt the shift too, a strange pressure building behind her eyes, a heat spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with fear. The lead attacker noticed it as well. His eyes narrowed behind his mask. "Careful," he warned his companions. "The collar should be holding her down, but something's slipping." "It's just fear," one guard said, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. "Fear doesn't do that," the lead man snapped, gesturing at Elena, and for the first time she realized her skin had begun to glow faintly, a soft golden light emanating from beneath the collar around her neck, as if her very blood had caught fire. Panic and something else entirely warred inside her. She had spent her whole life being told she had nothing inside her worth fearing, worth hiding, worth protecting. Yet here, in the depths of a stranger's dungeon, surrounded by masked men, who clearly believed otherwise, Something ancient and long buried was clawing its way to the surface. "Get the collar reinforced," the lead man ordered. "Now, before she—" He never finished the sentence. A deep, rolling growl echoed from the corridor entrance, low enough to vibrate through the floor, and every attacker in the hallway froze in place. King Draven Ashvale stood at the entrance to the dungeon, no longer wearing his simple black coat, but instead radiating an aura of barely contained fury, his amber eyes glowing with predatory focus. Behind him, a dozen royal guards poured into the corridor, weapons drawn, faces set with grim determination. "You dare bring armed men into my dungeons," Draven said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to shake the very stones around them. The lead attacker's confidence faltered for just a moment before he straightened, gripping a curved blade at his hip. "Your Majesty," he said, mockery lacing the title, "we're simply retrieving something that belongs to us." "She belongs to no one," Draven said, and something in his tone made Elena's chest tighten in a way she couldn't explain. The lead attacker's gray eyes flicked between Draven and Elena, calculation replacing his earlier confidence. "You don't even know what you're protecting, do you?" he said. "The wolfless girl in your dungeon isn't wolfless at all, and when the truth comes out, you'll wish you had let us take her quietly." "Enough talk," Draven growled, and the change happened so fast, Elena barely registered it. One moment he stood as a man, the next, a massive black wolf, larger than any she had ever imagined possible, lunged forward with terrifying speed and power. Chaos erupted in the narrow corridor. Guards clashed with masked attackers, steel ringing against steel, growls and shouts filling the air. Elena, still restrained by two guards who had briefly forgotten their orders in the sudden violence, felt the heat inside her chest surge past anything she had ever experienced. "Let go," she said again, and this time the words came out layered, doubled, as if two voices spoke through her at once, one human and one ancient beyond measure. The guards released her instantly, stumbling backward with wide, terrified eyes, as if some unseen force had physically compelled their hands to open. Elena stared at her own trembling fingers, gold light still flickering faintly beneath her skin, and for the first time in her life, she did not try to push the feeling down. She let it rise. The battle around her seemed to slow, sounds growing distant and muffled, as something ancient and powerful unfurled inside her chest like wings, finally stretching after a lifetime folded shut. She did not understand what was happening. She only understood that whatever slept inside her for 23 years had just opened its eyes. And somewhere in the chaos, King Draven Ashvale, mid-battle, felt an inexplicable pull yank at the very core of his wolf, a pull so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees before he even understood why. The masked attackers, sensing the sudden shift in power within the corridor, began retreating, dragging their wounded with them. The lead man cast one final glance at Elena before disappearing into the shadows beyond the broken dungeon door, his parting words hanging in the air like a threat. "This isn't over," he called back. "She belongs to the old bloodline, and the old bloodline always finds its way home." Draven, back in human form now, breathing hard, blood trickling from a shallow cut along his jaw, turned toward Elena, with an expression she had never seen on him before, somewhere between shock and disbelief. The golden light beneath her skin faded slowly, retreating back into whatever hidden place it had come from, leaving her exhausted and shaking, her legs barely able to hold her upright. She swayed, and before she could fall, strong arms caught her, steadying her against a chest that radiated warmth despite the chill of the dungeon air. "I have you," Draven said quietly, his voice rough, still carrying traces of the growl that had filled the corridor moments earlier. Elena looked up at him, too drained to pull away, too confused by everything happening inside her own body to summon the defiance she had shown him earlier. "What's happening to me?" she whispered. Draven's amber eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her chest ache. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever it is, it just made every guard in this corridor obey you without question, and it made my own wolf bow before I even understood why." Around them, the guards who had released Elena still stood frozen, staring at her, with expressions caught somewhere between fear and reverence, as if they had witnessed something far beyond their understanding of the natural order. Mabel's voice broke through the stunned silence, calm despite everything that had just unfolded. I did try to warn you, dear, she said, a faint, knowing smile ghosting across her weathered face. Some things cannot stay buried forever. Elena closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at every muscle in her body, the weight of 23 years of hidden truth finally beginning to surface. Whatever she was, whatever slept inside her, it had just announced itself to an entire kingdom, and there would be no burying it again. Draven's grip on her tightened slightly, protective in a way that confused her further, given that hours earlier he had ordered her thrown into this very dungeon without a second thought. You're not going back in that cell, he said quietly, more to himself than to her, as if making a decision he didn't fully understand yet, but knew he could not reverse. Somewhere above the dungeon, the horn that had signaled the attack finally fell silent, but Elena understood, with a clarity that settled deep into her bones, that the true storm was only just beginning. Elena woke to sunlight, warm and unfamiliar, spilling across silk sheets far softer than anything she had touched in years. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming again, another fragment of the forest and the song, but the ache in her limbs and the dull throb behind her eyes told her this was real. She sat up slowly, taking in her surroundings. A large room with tall windows, a fireplace crackling gently despite the summer warmth outside, and a wooden dresser carved with images of wolves running beneath a full moon. Nothing about this resembled a dungeon cell. The door opened, and a young woman entered carrying a tray of food, freezing the moment she noticed Elena awake. "Oh," she said, quickly setting the tray down and offering a small, nervous bow. "You're awake. I'll let His Majesty know right away." "Wait," Elena said, sitting up straighter. "Where am I? What happened?" The young woman hesitated, clearly unsure how much she was permitted to share. "You're in the west wing of the palace," she said carefully. "The king ordered you moved here after the attack 3 nights ago." 3 nights ago? Elena's stomach twisted. She had lost 3 days. "You collapsed after the fighting stopped," the woman explained. "The healers said you needed rest. His Majesty insisted you not be returned to the dungeons." She paused, glancing toward the door as if worried someone might overhear. "The whole palace has been talking about what happened down there. Guards releasing a prisoner without being touched. Lights beneath skin. Some are saying you're something out of the old stories." Elena's throat tightened. What old stories? Before the servant could answer, the door opened again, and this time, Draven himself stepped inside, dismissing the young woman with a small nod. She curtsied quickly and hurried out, leaving the two of them alone. He looked different than she remembered from the dungeon corridor, less rigid, though the intensity in his amber eyes remained unchanged. He wore simple clothing again, no crown, no armor, just a man studying her with careful, measured attention. "You're awake," he said, echoing the servant's earlier words, though his tone carried more weight behind it. "Where are my things?" Elena asked, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she felt in unfamiliar clothes, in an unfamiliar bed, surrounded by unfamiliar luxury that felt more like a gilded trap than comfort. "Your things are safe," Draven said, "as are you, for now." "For now," she repeated, unease creeping through her. He crossed the room slowly, taking a seat in a chair near the bed, rather than looming over her the way he had in the dungeon. The men who attacked the dungeon 3 nights ago belonged to a faction led by a rebel alpha named Garrick Thorne. He spent the last several years building support among wolves dissatisfied with my rule, gathering forces in the northern territories beyond my direct control. He paused, studying her carefully. "They came specifically for you. That is not something I can ignore." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, the memory of gold light beneath her skin, and the strange, doubled voice that had left her mouth still fresh and unsettling. "I don't understand what happened to me," she admitted quietly. "I've been told my entire life that I have no wolf, that I'm wolfless. But whatever came out of me in that corridor wasn't nothing." "No," Draven agreed. "It wasn't." "Then what was it?" He hesitated, and for the first time since she had met him, the Alpha King looked uncertain, searching for words he clearly wasn't accustomed to needing. "There are old legends," he said slowly, "about a bloodline called the Luna Prime. Wolves born not just to lead a single pack, but to command authority over all wolves, regardless of pack or territory. A bloodline so powerful it was considered a threat to every ruling alpha who came before me." Elena's breath caught. A threat? Centuries ago, the Luna Prime bloodline was hunted nearly to extinction, Draven continued, his voice heavy with the weight of history he clearly knew well. Kings feared losing their thrones to wolves, who could command obedience without conquest, without war, simply through the strength of their presence. It was believed the last of that bloodline died out generations ago. He met her eyes steadily. Until 3 nights ago, when every guard in that corridor released you without a single command from me, and my own wolf submitted to something inside you without my permission. The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fireplace. Elena's mind raced, piecing together fragments of a lifetime spent in hiding, guardians who never explained why, the dreams of forests and songs and crowns resting on fur. My guardians never told me anything, she said quietly. They just kept moving me, kept telling me it wasn't safe to stay anywhere too long. I always thought it was because I was in danger for some ordinary reason. Debt, enemies, something explainable. She looked up at him, eyes stinging with unshed tears she refused to let fall. Not because I might be the last piece of a bloodline someone tried to erase. Draven's expression softened slightly, something almost gentle passing behind his usually guarded eyes. Whoever hid you did so well, he said. The collar, the guards placed on you when you first arrived, the same kind used on dangerous prisoners, was likely reinforcing a suppression spell, already active in your blood. Something placed there, long before you ever reached my dungeons. Someone sealed me, Elena murmured, the pieces clicking together painfully. Sealed my wolf away to protect me. It would explain why you never shifted, why you believed yourself wolfless, despite carrying power strong enough to make an Alpha King's wolf kneel, Draven said. Elena pressed her palms against her eyes, overwhelmed by the sudden collapse of everything she had believed about herself. 23 years of one identity, shattered in a single violent night. Why did Garrick Thorne want me? She asked eventually, lowering her hands. Draven's jaw tightened. If word spreads that a Luna Prime bloodline survives, every faction seeking to challenge existing power structures will want to control you, either by allying with you or by eliminating you before you can be used against them. Thorne likely intended the same. Control you, or use your bloodline as a symbol to rally support against my throne. A cold knot formed in Elena's stomach. So I'm valuable, either as a weapon or as a target. You're valuable as yourself, Draven said, and something in his tone made her look up sharply, searching his face for the sincerity she thought she heard there. Whatever you decide to do with what's inside you, that choice belongs to you, not to Thorne, not to old legends, not even to me. The words settled strangely warm in her chest, at odds with the fear still coiling through her. She studied him carefully, trying to reconcile the man who had ordered her thrown in a dungeon cell without hesitation, with the man now sitting beside her bed, speaking of choice and autonomy, as if her well-being genuinely mattered to him. Why does this matter to you? She asked finally. Days ago, you didn't know I existed. Now you're protecting me from an uprising. Draven was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, despite everything. I don't fully understand it myself, he admitted, voice lower now, rougher. But when my wolf bowed to yours in that corridor, it wasn't just submission. It recognized something I have never felt before with anyone. Elena's heart thudded unevenly. Recognized what? I don't have the words for it yet, he said honestly, but I intend to find them. Before either of them could dwell further on the moment stretching between them, a sharp knock interrupted, and a guard entered looking grim. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. There's news from the northern border. Draven's expression hardened instantly, the softness from moments earlier vanishing behind the composed mask of a ruler. What news? Thorne has taken the outpost at Raven Hollow, the guard said. He's declared it the new seat of what he's calling the True Pack Council. He's also sent a formal message, addressed directly to the palace. Read it, Draven ordered. The guard hesitated, glancing briefly at Elena, before continuing. He says word has already spread of the wolfless prisoner, who commanded an entire dungeon corridor without lifting a hand. He says the Luna Prime bloodline has returned, and he intends to either secure her loyalty or ensure she never sits beside a throne that persecuted her ancestors. The room went cold, despite the crackling fire. Elena felt the weight of the guard's words settle over her like a shroud, the fragile safety of the palace suddenly feeling far more precarious than it had moments earlier. Draven rose from his chair, his entire posture shifting into something sharper, more commanding. "Increase security around the West Wing immediately," he ordered the guard. "No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization." "Yes, Your Majesty." The guard bowed and hurried out, leaving the heavy silence of the news lingering behind him. Elena stared at the closed door, her mind spinning with the sudden realization that whatever safety she believed she had found within these palace walls was already under threat, and that threat carried her name, whispered through enemy ranks like a prize to be claimed. "He knows," she said quietly. "He knows what I am, before I even fully understand it myself." Draven turned back to her, his amber eyes steady, despite the tension radiating from his shoulders. "Then we will simply have to make certain you understand it faster than he can use it against you," he said, "starting today." Elena looked at him, searching for any trace of doubt in his resolve, and finding none. Whatever uncertain, complicated thing had sparked between them in that dungeon corridor, it had just been given a deadline, and neither of them fully understood yet how far they would be forced to go before this was over. Later that afternoon, Draven brought Elena to a quiet garden courtyard, enclosed by high stone walls, private enough that no wandering eyes could observe them. Mabel was already there, seated on a wooden bench beneath a blossoming tree, looking remarkably at ease for someone who had been a dungeon prisoner just days earlier. "You freed her too," Elena said, surprised, glancing at Draven. "Mabel has been a guest of this kingdom for longer than most people realize," Draven said, a note of respect coloring his voice. "She was imprisoned by my father years ago for refusing to reveal information he demanded from her. I saw no reason to continue a punishment I never agreed with." Mabel offered a small, knowing smile. "The current king has better judgment than his predecessor," she said, "though he still has much to learn." "I'm standing right here," Draven said dryly, though there was no real irritation behind it. "Yes," Mabel replied, "that's rather the point." Elena found herself almost smiling, despite the weight pressing on her chest, grateful for even a small moment of levity amid the chaos of the past few days. She settled onto the bench beside Mabel, while Draven remained standing, arms crossed, watching with careful attention. "Now," Mabel said, turning her full focus onto Elena, "let's discuss what happened in that corridor, and how we intend to help you understand it, before Garrick Thorne forces the issue on his own terms." "I don't even know where to start," Elena admitted. "I don't know how I did what I did. It just happened." "That's often how it begins," Mabel said gently. "Power like yours doesn't wait for permission or preparation. It responds to necessity. You were afraid. You were desperate, and something inside you that had been sealed away for over 2 decades finally found a crack wide enough to break through." "Can you teach me to control it?" Elena asked, a thread of hope weaving through her uncertainty. "I can guide you," Mabel said, "but the true teacher will be your own instincts, once you learn to trust them instead of burying them." She reached out, taking Elena's hand gently. "Close your eyes." Elena hesitated, glancing briefly at Draven, who gave a small, encouraging nod. She closed her eyes, focusing on Mabel's steady voice. "Reach inward," Mabel instructed, "not toward fear, not toward panic, but toward warmth, the same warmth you felt in that corridor. It's still there, waiting." Elena breathed slowly, searching within herself, and after a long moment, she felt it, faint but unmistakable, a soft ember of warmth resting deep beneath her ribs, patient and steady, rather than wild and overwhelming, as it had felt during the attack. "I feel it," she whispered. "Good," Mabel said. "Now, gently, invite it forward, not force it, invite it." Elena focused on the warmth, coaxing it upward, the way one might coax a nervous animal from hiding, and slowly, she felt a soft pulse of energy spread through her chest, down her arms, warming her fingertips. When she opened her eyes, a faint golden glow flickered beneath her skin, steady and controlled this time, nothing like the overwhelming surge from the dungeon corridor. Draven's breath caught audibly. Elena glanced up at him, startled by the raw wonder etched across his features, so different from the composed, guarded expression he usually wore. "That's remarkable," he said quietly. "It doesn't feel dangerous," Elena said, studying the light dancing across her own hands. "It feels like it's mine." "It has always been yours," Mabel said. "You simply weren't permitted to know it." The glow faded gently, as Elena relaxed, though the warmth beneath her ribs remained, no longer buried, but resting close to the surface, accessible in a way it had never been before. "This is only the beginning," Mabel warned. "What you displayed in that corridor, the ability to compel obedience, even from an Alpha King's wolf, is not something you conjure through simple meditation. That level of command responds to instinct, emotion, necessity. Learning to summon it deliberately, safely, without losing yourself to it, will take time and discipline." "Time we may not have much of," Draven said grimly. "Thorn isn't going to wait for Elena to master her abilities before he makes his next move." "Then we adapt as we go," Mabel said simply. "As all wolves eventually learn to do." Elena looked between the two of them, the old seer who had spent years imprisoned for protecting secrets not her own, and the king, who had begun to shed the guarded distance he first showed her, and felt something shift inside her chest that had nothing to do with golden light or ancient bloodlines. For the first time since guards dragged her chained through cold stone corridors, she did not feel entirely alone. "Thank you," she said quietly, meeting Draven's eyes, "for not sending me back to that cell." Something flickered across his expression, warm and unguarded for just a moment, before he schooled his features back into careful composure. "You were never meant to be there in the first place," he said. "I intend to make certain you never are again." The words carried a weight that went beyond simple protection, and Elena felt her pulse quicken under his steady gaze, aware of a pull between them that neither ancient bloodlines nor royal politics could fully explain. Overhead, clouds began gathering across the afternoon sky, distant thunder rumbling low on the horizon, an echo of the storm Elena knew was still building, far beyond these palace walls, waiting for the moment it would finally break. 3 days of training passed in the private courtyard, each session leaving Elena more exhausted than the last, yet each day the golden warmth beneath her ribs answered her call more readily than before. Mabel pushed her gently but firmly, teaching her to draw the power forward without letting fear or urgency drag it out in uncontrolled bursts. On the 4th morning, a royal messenger arrived at the courtyard gate, informing Draven that the Council of Noble Alphas had gathered in the Great Hall, demanding an audience regarding the recent unrest and the rumors now spreading through every corner of the kingdom. "They want to see her," the messenger said carefully, glancing at Elena. Draven's jaw tightened. "Of course they do." "I should go," Elena said, straightening despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Hiding from them will only make things worse." "They won't be kind," Draven warned. "Many of those alphas built their power through generations of loyalty to bloodlines that once hunted yours. They will see you as a threat before they see you as a person." "Then I'll simply have to prove them wrong," Elena said, meeting his gaze with a steadiness that had grown more natural to her over the past few days. Draven studied her for a long moment, something like pride flickering behind his amber eyes, before he nodded. "Stay close to me," he said, "and remember what Mabel taught you. Control, not force." The great hall was vast, lined with towering stone pillars and banners bearing the crests of noble packs from across the kingdom. Dozens of alphas and their advisors filled the room, murmurs rippling through the crowd the moment Elena entered beside Draven. At the head of the gathered nobles stood a broad, silver-haired man with cold, calculating eyes, his posture radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of unchallenged power. Elena recognized the crest on his coat, a mountain wrapped in chains, belonging to one of the oldest and most influential packs in the kingdom. "Your Majesty," the man said, offering a shallow bow that carried more mockery than respect. "I see the rumors were true. You've brought the wolfless prisoner into open court." "Lord Hendrix," Draven said evenly. "Elena is no longer a prisoner." "So I've heard," Hendrix replied, his gaze sweeping over Elena with open scrutiny. "Though what exactly she is remains a matter of considerable debate." Murmurs rippled through the hall again, some nobles nodding in agreement, others watching with cautious curiosity rather than outright hostility. "She carries the blood of the Luna Prime line," Draven said, his voice carrying clearly across the hall, silencing the murmurs instantly. "A bloodline your own ancestors, Lord Hendrix, once helped hunt to near extinction, out of fear that a wolf capable of commanding obedience, without conquest, might threaten the power structures your family has enjoyed for generations." Hendrix's expression darkened, though he kept his composure. "A bold claim, Your Majesty, Based on what evidence? Based on the fact that every guard present during the attack on the dungeons released her without a single command from me, Draven said. Based on the fact that my own wolf submitted to her presence before I understood why. Would you care for a demonstration, Lord Hendricks? The hall fell utterly silent. Elena felt every eye in the room settle on her, weighing her, judging her, some with fear, others with barely concealed greed at the thought of what an alliance with such power might mean for their own ambitions. Hendricks's eyes narrowed, calculation flickering behind his cold gaze. I would indeed, he said, a challenge lacing his tone. Elena's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain steady, remembering Mabel's careful instructions. Control, not force. She closed her eyes briefly, reaching inward toward the warmth resting beneath her ribs, inviting it forward gently, rather than letting fear yank it out in an uncontrolled surge. When she opened her eyes, a soft golden light traced beneath her skin, steady and deliberate, and she let her voice carry across the hall, calm but resonant, carrying an undertone that seemed to hum through the very stones of the palace. I have no interest in commanding anyone against their will, she said. I only ask to be judged by my actions, not by fear of what I might become. The words settled over the hall with unexpected weight, and several alphas, without any deliberate intention on Elena's part, found themselves bowing their heads slightly, an instinctive response to the authority woven through her voice, gentle as it was. Hendricks's own knees bent slightly before he caught himself, straightening with visible effort, fury and something like grudging respect warring across his features. Impressive, he admitted stiffly, though impressive power does not automatically earn trust. No, Elena agreed. It doesn't. Trust is something I intend to earn through action, not demand through bloodline alone. A long, tense silence stretched through the hall, before an unexpected voice broke it. A younger alpha near the back of the gathering, wearing the crest of a smaller northern pack, stepped forward hesitantly. Your Majesty, he said, addressing Draven, though his eyes remained on Elena. If what she says is true, if Garrick Thorne intends to use her bloodline as a rallying symbol against the throne, would it not be wiser to have her standing openly beside you, rather than hidden away where rumors can distort the truth further? Draven's expression remained composed, but Elena caught the faint approval flickering behind his eyes. A fair point, Lord Ashford. Hendricks scoffed quietly, but said nothing further, apparently unwilling to continue arguing against a room slowly shifting toward cautious acceptance, rather than outright rejection. The council session continued for nearly 2 more hours, discussing border security, the growing threat from Thorne's forces at Ravenhollow, and the delicate matter of how to address rumors, already spreading among the wider population. Elena remained mostly silent, observing the intricate political dance unfolding around her, learning more about the kingdom's structure in a single afternoon than she had learned in 23 years of hiding from it. As the council finally dispersed, Draven guided Elena toward a quieter corridor, away from lingering eyes and ears. You handled that better than most seasoned diplomats, he said, a note of genuine admiration coloring his voice. I was terrified the entire time, Elena admitted, finally allowing her shoulders to relax, now that the weight of dozens of scrutinizing gazes had lifted. You didn't show it, Draven said. That matters more than you realize in a room like that. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, before Elena spoke again, curiosity finally overtaking caution. Lord Ashford seemed different from the others, more open. His pack has always maintained closer ties to the old stories, the ones most nobles prefer to forget, Draven said. His grandmother used to speak of the Luna Prime bloodline as protectors, not threats. It seems that perspective survived within his family, even as it faded elsewhere. Protectors, Elena repeated softly, turning the word over in her mind. That's not how Thorne described it. He called it a bloodline that always finds its way home, like something inevitable, almost like a weapon waiting to be claimed. Draven's expression sobered. Thorne sees power as something to be wielded for control. It's likely he cannot fathom the idea of power existing simply to protect, without demanding submission in return. And you? Elena asked quietly, studying his face carefully. What do you see when you look at what's inside me? He stopped walking, turning to face her fully, the corridor around them empty and quiet, sunlight filtering through tall windows and casting warm light across his features. I see someone who has spent her entire life being told she was less than what she truly is, he said, voice low and sincere. And I see someone choosing, even now, surrounded by people who fear or covet her power, to use it with restraint and compassion, rather than force. That tells me far more about you than any old legend ever could. Elena's breath caught at the raw honesty in his words, the careful distance he had maintained since their first meeting in the dungeon corridor, finally beginning to dissolve into something warmer, something that made her pulse race, in a way that had nothing to do with fear or ancient bloodlines. Draven, she said softly, testing his name without title for the first time. Something shifted in his expression, amber eyes darkening slightly as he studied her face, close enough now that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Elena, he replied, equally soft. The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged, until the distant sound of hurried footsteps echoing down the corridor forced them apart, both straightening, as a guard rounded the corner, breathless and urgent. Your Majesty, the guard said, bowing quickly. Forgive the interruption. A messenger has arrived from the northern border. He says it's urgent, regarding Ravenhollow. Draven's expression hardened instantly, the warmth of moments earlier replaced by sharp, focused attention. Send him to the war room immediately. As the guard hurried off, Draven glanced back at Elena, something unspoken passing between them, a promise of a conversation left unfinished, interrupted by duties neither of them could ignore. Come, he said. Whatever this news is, it likely concerns you as much as it concerns the throne. Together, they made their way toward the war room, the fragile warmth of the moment they had just shared, tucked away for later, overshadowed by the growing shadow of the storm, building steadily on the horizon. The war room was smaller than the great hall, dominated by a long table covered in maps marked with territory lines, pack borders, and small carved markers representing troop movements. A weary messenger stood near the table, mud still clinging to his boots, clearly having ridden hard and long to deliver his news. Speak, Draven said, taking his place at the head of the table. Ravenhollow has grown stronger than our scouts anticipated, the messenger said, breathing steadying slightly, now that he had reached his destination. Thorn has gathered nearly 300 wolves under his banner, drawn from smaller northern packs disillusioned with the current pack council structure. He's also secured allegiance from 2 border settlements, previously loyal to the crown. Elena watched Draven's expression carefully as he absorbed the information, his jaw tightening, eyes narrowing over the map spread before him. 300, he repeated quietly. That's more than double what our last report suggested. There's more, Your Majesty, the messenger continued, hesitating slightly. Thorn has begun sending riders to every noble pack in the kingdom, not just the northern territories. His message speaks openly of the Luna Prime bloodline's return, framing it as proof that the crown has been hiding ancient injustices from its people. He's calling for a gathering of packs at Ravenhollow within the fortnight, inviting any alpha willing to challenge what he calls generations of suppressed truth. The room fell into tense silence. Elena felt the weight of dozens of implications pressing down on her at once. Thorn wasn't simply preparing for war. He was building a movement, using her existence as the foundation for a rebellion that could fracture the entire kingdom's loyalty structure. He's turning me into a symbol, Elena said quietly, the realization settling heavy in her chest, whether I want it or not. Symbols can be reclaimed, Mabel's voice said from the doorway. She had entered quietly, unnoticed until she spoke, her sharp eyes taking in the map and the tension filling the room. The question is, whether you allow Thorn to define what you represent, or whether you step forward and define it yourself. Draven looked between Elena and Mabel, something calculating shifting behind his amber eyes. What are you suggesting? Thorn is inviting packs to Ravenhollow to hear his version of events, Mabel said. What if the true Luna Prime spoke for herself instead, before his gathering, before his narrative takes root unchallenged? That's incredibly dangerous, Draven said immediately, protectiveness sharpening his tone. Sending Elena into contested territory, potentially surrounded by wolves, sympathetic to Thorn's cause, would be reckless. Reckless, perhaps, Mabel agreed, but allowing Thorn to control every narrative surrounding her existence while she remains hidden behind palace walls carries its own dangers. Fear grows fastest in silence, Your Majesty. You know this as well as I do. Elena studied the map spread across the table, tracing the marked distance between the palace and Ravenhollow, considering the weight of what Mabel was suggesting. A public appearance. A chance to speak for herself, rather than remain a rumor whispered through frightened and ambitious minds alike. I want to go, she said finally, surprising even herself with the steadiness in her voice. Elena, Draven began, concern evident in every line of his posture. You said it yourself, she interrupted gently. Whatever I choose to do with what's inside me, that choice belongs to me. I'm choosing to face this directly, rather than hide behind palace walls while someone else decides what I represent. Draven studied her for a long moment, torn between the protective instinct clearly warring within him and the respect he had shown her choices since the moment she first stood defiant before him in the dungeon corridor. Finally, he exhaled slowly, some of the tension easing from his shoulders, though his eyes remained sharp with concern. If you go, he said, you do not go alone. I will accompany you personally, along with a full guard contingent. That could easily be seen as an act of aggression, the messenger interjected cautiously. Marching the king's own forces into contested territory might only escalate tensions further. Then we go carefully, Draven said. A small, deliberate presence, not an army. Enough protection to ensure her safety, not enough to appear as a declaration of war. Mabel nodded slowly, approval evident in her expression. A wise balance, Your Majesty. Elena felt a mixture of fear and determination settle over her, the weight of the decision she had just made, pressing down alongside a strange, steady resolve. For 23 years, decisions about her life had been made by others, guardians moving her from town to town, kings and rebels alike, now vying to claim or destroy whatever she represented. This was the first decision that was entirely her own. When do we leave? She asked. 2 days, Draven said. That gives us enough time to send word ahead, arranging safe passage through neutral territories, and ensures your training with Mabel continues as long as possible before we arrive. The messenger bowed and excused himself, leaving Elena, Draven, and Mabel alone in the war room, the weight of the coming journey settling heavily over the space between them. You're certain about this? Draven asked quietly, once the door had closed. No, Elena admitted honestly, but I'm more certain of this than I am of hiding and letting Thorn shape a story about me that isn't true. Something like admiration flickered behind Draven's eyes, mixed with an undeniable current of worry he made no attempt to fully hide. Then we prepare, he said. Together. Mabel watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction, though a shadow of concern lingered behind her sharp gaze, one she chose not to voice aloud, at least not yet. Whatever waited for them at Ravenhollow, she suspected it would test not only Elena's growing control over her abilities, but the fragile, unspoken bond steadily forming between the wolfless prisoner and the Alpha King who had once ordered her locked away. Outside the war room windows, evening settled over the palace grounds, the distant northern sky already darkening with clouds that seemed to gather with unnatural purpose, as if the very weather sensed the storm now set irrevocably into motion. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Elena spent her mornings with Mabel in the courtyard, pushing her control further each session, learning to summon the golden warmth without the trembling uncertainty that had marked her earliest attempts. By the second evening, she could call it forward and let it recede again, with a steadiness that even Mabel seemed pleasantly surprised by. You learn quickly, Mabel said, watching the light fade from beneath Elena's skin as she released her focus. Faster than most wolves learn their first shift. I've had 23 years of practice hiding things, Elena said quietly. Maybe that taught me something about control, even if I didn't know it at the time. Mabel's expression softened. Perhaps it did. That night, sleep did not come easily. Elena lay awake in the unfamiliar softness of her palace bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind cycling through everything that had changed in the span of a single week. A week ago, she had been a nobody sneaking through gardens, searching for fragments of a past she barely remembered. Now she was preparing to ride into contested territory, carrying a bloodline that could either unite or fracture an entire kingdom. When she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, the dream returned, sharper and more vivid than ever before. The forest bathed in silver moonlight. the woman's voice singing softly in a language she somehow understood despite never having learned it. This time, though, the dream carried further, revealing a face she had never seen clearly before. A woman with warm brown eyes and dark hair, cradling an infant against her chest, humming the same melody that had haunted Elena's nights for years. "Sleep now, little one," the woman whispered in the dream, voice trembling with a mixture of love and fear. "Wherever they take you, wherever you must hide, remember this song. It will remind you who you are, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise." Elena woke gasping, tears streaming down her face before she even understood why. The melody lingered in her mind, clearer now than it had ever been, and for the first time, she recognized it wasn't just a fragment of imagination. It was a memory. Her mother's voice, singing to her the night everything changed. She spent the remainder of the night sitting by the window, watching the stars fade into dawn, the melody repeating softly under her breath, a fragile thread, connecting her to a past she had spent her entire life unable to reach. By morning, the traveling party assembled in the palace courtyard. Draven stood at the front, dressed for travel rather than court, a simple traveling coat replacing his usual formal attire, though the authority in his bearing remained unmistakable. 10 guards accompanied them, chosen carefully for discretion and skill rather than sheer numbers, along with Mabel, who insisted on joining despite her age. "Someone needs to keep both of you from making foolish decisions," she had said, when Draven initially protested her involvement, and neither of them had found a strong enough argument to change her mind. The first 2 days of travel passed without incident, the group moving steadily north along quiet roads bordered by dense forest, the terrain growing wilder and less familiar with each passing mile. Elena found herself riding beside Draven for much of the journey, their earlier interrupted conversation resurfacing in fragments during quiet moments between them. "Tell me about your childhood," Elena said on the second evening, as they made camp beside a narrow stream, the guards setting up a defensive perimeter around their small encampment. Draven glanced at her, surprised by the question. "There isn't much to tell that would interest you," he said. "Strict training, endless expectations, a father who believed weakness was the only true failure a future king could commit." "That sounds lonely," Elena said softly. Something flickered across his face, brief but genuine. "It was," he admitted. "I learned early that showing uncertainty was seen as unfit for leadership. So I stopped showing it, even when I felt it." "Do you still feel it?" Elena asked. "Uncertainty?" Draven was quiet for a long moment, staring into the small fire crackling between them. "More than I have in years," he said finally, glancing up to meet her eyes. "Since the night you arrived in my dungeons." Elena's heart quickened at the honesty in his admission. "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't entirely certain what she was apologizing for. "Don't be," Draven said, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time since she had known him. "Uncertainty, it seems, isn't always the weakness my father claimed it to be." The moment stretched warm and quiet between them, interrupted only by the soft crackle of the fire and the distant sound of night birds calling through the forest. For a brief span of time, the looming threat of Thorn's gathering forces felt distant, overshadowed by something simpler and far more fragile, growing steadily between them. That fragile peace shattered abruptly on the third night. Elena woke to shouting, the clash of steel, and the sharp scent of smoke drifting through the camp. She scrambled out of her tent to find chaos erupting around her, masked figures bearing the same broken circle emblem from the dungeon attack clashing violently with the royal guards. "Ambush!" one guard shouted, cutting down an attacker before spinning to block another strike. Draven emerged from his own tent already shifted, his massive black wolf form lunging into the fray with terrifying speed, but even his ferocity seemed matched by the sheer number of attackers pressing in from the tree line. Elena's pulse pounded as she searched frantically for Mabel, finding the old woman pressed against a fallen log, fending off an attacker with a walking staff, and surprising agility for someone her age. "Elena, get down." Mabel called, but Elena had already felt the warmth surging beneath her ribs, urgent and insistent, responding to the danger crashing around them. She closed her eyes briefly, reaching for the control Mabel had spent days teaching her, refusing to let panic override the careful discipline she had built. When she opened her eyes, golden light traced steadily beneath her skin, and she raised her voice, letting it carry across the chaos of the camp. "Stop," she commanded, the word layered with that same doubled resonance from the dungeon corridor, though steadier now, more deliberate. The effect rippled outward instantly. Several attackers froze mid-motion, weapons faltering in their grip, an instinctive, involuntary response to the authority woven through her voice. It wasn't complete control, not enough to end the fight entirely, but it was enough to shift the balance, buying the Royal Guards crucial seconds to regroup and press their advantage. Draven, still in wolf form, took advantage of the momentary hesitation rippling through the attackers, driving them back toward the tree line with brutal efficiency. Within minutes, the remaining attackers broke formation, retreating into the darkness of the forest, leaving several of their own wounded behind in their haste to escape. Silence settled over the camp, broken only by ragged breathing and the crackle of the dying campfire. Draven shifted back to human form, blood trickling from a shallow wound along his shoulder, and crossed the camp quickly to where Elena stood, still shaking from the effort of maintaining her control. "Are you hurt?" he asked, hands hovering near her shoulders, checking for injury, with an urgency that betrayed how deeply the attack had shaken him. "I'm fine," Elena said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Are you?" "I'll heal," he said dismissively, though his eyes remained fixed on her with unmistakable relief. Mabel approached, her expression grim despite her own steady composure. "That was not a coincidence," she said. "They knew our route. Someone informed Thorn's forces exactly where and when to strike." Draven's jaw tightened, fury flashing behind his amber eyes. "A spy," he said quietly. "Within my own ranks." The realization settled heavily over the camp, the fragile peace of moments before completely shattered by the certainty that whoever had betrayed their location remained hidden among those they trusted, and would likely strike again before their journey to Ravenhollow ever reached its end. The remaining guards gathered near the fire, faces grim, as Draven addressed them directly. "Someone among those who knew our travel route shared that information," he said, his voice carrying the controlled fury of a man determined not to let anger cloud his judgment. "I want every person who had knowledge of this journey's exact path questioned upon our return, discreetly." "Understood, Your Majesty," the senior guard replied, though the tension in his shoulders suggested he understood the implications all too well. Trust, once fractured within a close-knit group, rarely mended easily. Elena sat near the fire, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders despite the mild night air, the aftermath of summoning her power leaving her chilled and drained in a way physical exertion alone never had. Mabel settled beside her, offering a cup of warm tea from the small supplies that had survived the attack. "You did well tonight," Mabel said quietly. "I froze half of them for a few seconds," Elena said. "That's hardly mastery." "That's exactly what mastery looks like at this stage," Mabel corrected gently. "You reached for control instead of panic, even in the middle of chaos. Most wolves spend years learning that discipline. You've had days." Elena wrapped her hands around the warm cup, watching steam curl into the cool night air. "Do you think the spy is someone close to Draven? Someone he trusts?" Mabel's expression grew thoughtful. "Betrayal rarely comes from strangers, dear. It comes from those positioned closely enough to know what matters most." She glanced toward Draven, who stood apart from the group, staring into the darkness of the forest where the attackers had retreated, tension radiating from every line of his posture. "This will weigh on him more than he shows." Elena watched him for a long moment, understanding settling over her. A king who had spent his life projecting unshakable strength was now confronting the possibility that someone within his own trusted circle had nearly gotten her killed, and by extension, had betrayed him as well. She rose from her seat by the fire and crossed the camp to stand beside him. "This isn't your fault," she said quietly. "Someone I trusted enough to inform of our route sold that information to Thorn's forces," Draven said, not looking away from the darkened tree line. "That makes it very much my responsibility." "You didn't hand them a weapon and point it at me yourself," Elena said. "You can't control every choice made by people around you, even people you trust." Draven finally turned to look at her, something raw and unguarded flickering behind his amber eyes. "I nearly lost you tonight," he said, voice low. "That's not a risk I take lightly, regardless of whose fault it is." The admission hung between them, heavier than either of them seemed prepared to address directly. Elena felt her pulse quicken. the same pull she had felt in the corridor days earlier tightening in her chest. "I'm still here," she said softly. "Yes," Draven said, reaching up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek longer than necessary. "You are." The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged, until the distant call of a night bird startled them both back into awareness of their surroundings, of the guards still watchful nearby, of the danger that remained far from over. Draven cleared his throat, stepping back slightly, though his eyes remained warm. "We should rest while we can," he said. "We'll reach the outskirts of Ravenhollow territory by tomorrow evening. Whatever waits for us there, we'll need our strength." Elena nodded, though sleep felt distant given the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. As she returned to her tent, she glanced back once more at Draven, who remained standing watch near the fire, his silhouette outlined against the flickering light, a king, carrying burdens far heavier than any crown alone could represent. She thought of her mother's melody, still fresh in her memory from the dream 2 nights prior, and hummed it softly under her breath as she finally settled into an uneasy but determined sleep, the weight of tomorrow's journey pressing steadily closer with each passing hour. Dawn broke gray and overcast, mist clinging low across the forest floor, as the traveling party packed their remaining supplies and continued northward. The mood among the group had shifted noticeably since the previous night's attack, guards riding with weapons drawn, and eyes scanning the tree line constantly, trust among the ranks visibly strained. By midday, the dense forest began thinning, giving way to rolling hills marked with the occasional watchtower, silent evidence that they had crossed into territory now firmly under Thorn's growing influence. Elena felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach with every mile that passed, the reality of what awaited them at Ravenhollow settling heavier with each step closer. "Once we arrive," Draven said quietly, riding close beside her as the hills stretched wide and empty around them, "Thorn will likely try to provoke a reaction from you in front of the gathered packs. He wants to prove you're dangerous, unpredictable, someone to be feared rather than trusted." "I won't give him that satisfaction," Elena said, though the uncertainty in her own voice betrayed how difficult that promise might prove to keep. "I know," Draven said, something steady and reassuring in his tone despite the tension of their surroundings. "Whatever happens at Ravenhollow, you won't face it alone." Elena met his gaze, drawing strength from the quiet certainty in his expression, and together they rode onward, the distant silhouette of Ravenhollow's watchtowers finally coming into view against the darkening horizon, the true test of everything Elena had learned about herself waiting just beyond the next ridge. Ravenhollow had once been a modest trading outpost, but under Thorn's occupation, it had transformed into something resembling a fortified camp, wooden palisades reinforced with iron, watchtowers manned by armed sentries, and banners bearing the broken circle emblem hanging from nearly every visible structure. As Draven's small party approached the main gate, word of their arrival spread quickly, wolves gathering along the walls and rooftops to witness the unprecedented sight of the Alpha King riding openly into contested territory. A tall figure emerged from the gathered crowd near the gate, broad-shouldered and imposing, gray eyes sharp with calculation, beneath a weathered face marked by an old scar running along his jaw. Elena recognized him immediately, despite the absence of the mask he had worn during the dungeon attack. Garrick Thorn. "Your Majesty," Thorn said, his tone dripping with mockery, disguised as respect. "I confess, I did not expect you to accept my invitation so directly, and certainly not with her at your side." "I go where I choose, Thorn," Draven said evenly, dismounting slowly, his posture radiating calm authority, despite the hundreds of unfamiliar eyes watching from every direction. Elena dismounted as well, forcing herself to stand tall despite the anxious pounding of her heart, remembering everything Mabel had taught her about control, about presence, about refusing to let fear dictate her actions. Thorn's gaze settled on her, calculating and cold. "The wolfless prisoner herself," he said, voice carrying easily across the gathered crowd. "Or should I say, the last of the Luna Prime bloodline, hidden away for over 2 decades by a crown, desperate to keep the truth buried." "I wasn't hidden by the crown," Elena said, her voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes now fixed on her. "I was hidden by people who loved me, who feared exactly this, being used as a symbol by someone with their own agenda, rather than being allowed to simply exist as myself." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathered crowd, some wolves nodding subtly, others exchanging uncertain glances. Thorn's expression tightened slightly, clearly not the response he had anticipated. "A pretty speech," he said, recovering quickly. "But speeches do not undo centuries of injustice. Your bloodline was hunted, persecuted, nearly erased entirely by kings who feared losing their unchallenged power. Tell me, Your Majesty," he continued, turning his sharp gaze toward Draven, "does the girl know that her own ancestors were slaughtered by decree of a king wearing the very crown you now wear?" Elena felt her stomach twist, glancing toward Draven, searching his expression for confirmation or denial. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, genuine discomfort flickered across his features before he composed himself. "History carries injustices from every era," Draven said carefully. "I do not deny the actions of kings before me, but I am not my ancestors, and Elena is not a weapon to be claimed by whoever shouts loudest about past wrongs." "Convenient words from a man who benefits directly from the throne those ancestors secured," Thorn countered, addressing the crowd now more than Draven himself. "I offer something different, a council where every pack has equal voice, where bloodlines like hers are honored rather than feared, where power is shared rather than hoarded by a single crown." Elena studied the gathered crowd, noting the way many wolves leaned forward, clearly drawn by the promise of change Thorn offered, promises that likely carried genuine appeal for packs who had long felt overlooked by centralized royal power. She understood, in that moment, that this conflict was never going to be resolved through simple displays of strength alone. "May I speak?" she asked, addressing the crowd directly rather than Thorn. Thorn's eyes narrowed, but with hundreds of witnesses watching, denying her the opportunity to speak would only reinforce the very narrative of suppression he claimed to be fighting against. "By all means," he said, gesturing broadly with false generosity. Elena stepped forward, drawing on every ounce of composure Mabel's training had instilled in her over the past week. "I understand the anger many of you carry," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet crowd. "I understand feeling unseen, unheard, dismissed by those in power. I spent 23 years being told I was nothing, wolfless, powerless, insignificant. I know what it feels like to be denied the truth of who you are." The crowd remained silent, listening intently, and Elena felt the golden warmth stirring gently beneath her ribs, not surging uncontrollably as it had during moments of danger, but resting steady, responsive to the sincerity of her words rather than fear. "But I will not become a symbol used to justify more bloodshed," she continued. "Not for a crown that once persecuted my bloodline, and not for a rebellion that would use my existence as a weapon against a kingdom I am only beginning to understand. If real change is possible, it will come through more voices being heard, not through fear replacing fear." A long, tense silence stretched across the crowd, before scattered murmurs of approval began rippling outward, several wolves nodding, exchanging glances that suggested Elena's words had struck something genuine within them, undermining the simple narrative of villain and savior Thorn had clearly hoped to establish. Thorn's expression darkened, frustration finally breaking through his composed mask. "Pretty words will not undo what the crown has done," he snapped, his tone sharper now, less controlled. "Perhaps it's time the girl demonstrated exactly what she is, rather than simply talking about it." Before Elena could respond, Thorn gestured sharply, and several of his lieutenants stepped forward, weapons drawn, positioning themselves in a loose semicircle around Elena and Draven. The crowd shifted uneasily, sensing the sudden escalation. "Thorn," Draven warned, stepping protectively closer to Elena, his own posture shifting into readiness. "Relax, Your Majesty," Thorn said, though his cold eyes remained fixed on Elena. "I simply want the truth, witnessed by everyone gathered here. Show them what you are, girl. Show them the power that makes even an Alpha King's wolf kneel." Elena's heart pounded, understanding the trap laid before her. Refuse, and she would appear weak, powerless, exactly as Thorn had originally dismissed her. Comply under threat, and she would validate his narrative of her as a weapon to be commanded by whoever forced her hand. She glanced briefly at Draven, finding steady reassurance in his amber eyes, despite the tension radiating from his shoulders, and made her decision. "I won't perform for you, Thorn," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Not out of fear, and not out of obedience. If I ever choose to reveal what I am fully capable of, it will be my choice. Made freely. Not something extracted through threats in front of a crowd you've gathered to serve your own ambitions. Thorn's expression twisted with fury, and he took a threatening step forward, one hand gripping the hilt of a blade at his hip. Then perhaps you need further motivation, he growled, nodding sharply toward his lieutenants. What happened next unfolded in mere seconds. One of Thorn's men lunged toward Draven, blade flashing in the fading afternoon light. Draven shifted instantly, massive black wolf form colliding with the attacker before the blade could find its mark, sending both crashing to the ground in a violent tangle. Chaos erupted around them, guards scrambling to defend their king, gathered crowd members scattering in confused alarm, some fleeing, while others surged forward, uncertain whether to intervene or simply watch the unfolding conflict. Elena felt fear and fury collide inside her chest, the golden warmth surging upward with an intensity she had never felt before. No longer gentle and controlled, but urgent, protective, refusing to remain hidden while Draven fought for his life mere feet away from her. "Enough," she shouted, and this time, the word tore free with overwhelming force, golden light erupting from beneath her skin, in a brilliant wave that rippled outward across the entire courtyard. Every wolf within the sound of her voice froze instantly, weapons faltering, bodies bending involuntarily at the knee, an undeniable wave of ancient authority washing over the gathered crowd, with a power far beyond anything Elena had displayed before. Even Thorn, mid-motion toward his fallen lieutenant, found his legs buckling beneath him, fury and disbelief warring across his face, as his own body betrayed him, forcing him down to one knee despite his desperate resistance. Silence fell over Ravenhollow, broken only by ragged breathing and the distant crackle of a dropped torch sputtering against damp ground. Every single wolf present, royal guard and rebel alike, knelt before her, the truth of her bloodline, no longer a rumor or a claim, but an undeniable, visible reality, witnessed by hundreds simultaneously. Elena stood trembling in the center of the courtyard, golden light still flickering beneath her skin, staring at the sea of bowed heads surrounding her, understanding with dawning clarity that whatever happened next, there would be no returning to the quiet anonymity she had spent her entire life hidden within. Draven, back in human form now, rose slowly from where he had fought moments earlier, blood trickling from a shallow wound but very much alive, and made his way toward her through the kneeling crowd, the only person present who did not bend, standing steady beside her instead, close enough that his presence alone helped ground her against the overwhelming weight of what she had just revealed to the entire kingdom. "Elena," Draven said quietly, reaching for her trembling hands, grounding her with his steady presence. "You can release it now. You're safe." Elena focused inward, gently coaxing the golden light back into stillness, the way Mabel had taught her, and slowly, gradually, the overwhelming pressure filling the courtyard began to ease. One by one, the kneeling wolves rose unsteadily to their feet, expressions ranging from fear to awe, to something that looked almost like relief, as if a truth long denied had finally, undeniably surfaced. Thorn rose last, his expression a mixture of fury and something more calculating, his cold eyes studying Elena with renewed intensity. "So the legends were true after all," he said quietly, though his voice carried enough for those nearby to hear. "The Luna Prime bloodline has returned in full." "I did not do that to prove a point to you, Thorn," Elena said, still breathing hard from the exertion, though her voice remained steady. "I did it because you gave me no other choice, and because Draven's life was in danger." "Regardless of your intentions," Thorn said, straightening his coat with forced composure, "every wolf in this courtyard just witnessed proof of what I've been saying. Your bloodline was suppressed because it represents a threat to unchallenged power. The question now is what you intend to do with that truth." "I intend to make certain it's never used to justify more violence," Elena said. "Not by you, and not by anyone else who sees my existence as a tool for their own ambitions." Murmurs rippled through the crowd again, and Elena noticed several wolves who had originally gathered under Thorn's banner, exchanging uncertain glances, clearly reconsidering their allegiance in the wake of what they had just witnessed. Thorn noticed it too, his jaw tightening with barely restrained frustration. "This isn't finished," he said quietly, addressing Draven and Elena both, "but perhaps today was not the day to settle it through force." He gestured sharply to his remaining lieutenants, who reluctantly lowered their weapons. Leave Ravenhollow. Consider this a temporary reprieve, not a resolution. Draven's guards moved quickly to regroup around them, wary eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of renewed hostility as they made their way back toward the main gate. Elena kept close to Draven's side, her legs still unsteady from the aftermath of releasing such overwhelming power, grateful for his steady presence guiding her through the tense, watchful crowd. They rode in silence for nearly an hour after leaving Ravenhollow's walls behind, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly fading, leaving Elena drained and shaking in its wake. Once they reached a safe distance and made camp for the night, Mabel immediately took charge, insisting Elena rest while the guards secured their perimeter with heightened vigilance. "You held it far longer than I expected possible for someone with so little training," Mabel said, studying Elena carefully, as she settled beside the fire, wrapped in a heavy blanket against the exhaustion pulling at her limbs. "It didn't feel like control," Elena admitted. "It felt like something broke loose entirely." "In moments of genuine danger, that's often exactly what happens," Mabel said gently. "True mastery isn't about preventing that break entirely. It's about learning to guide the power once it's loose, rather than letting it consume you completely." "And you did guide it, Elena. You released it the moment the danger passed, rather than letting it linger unchecked." Draven approached quietly, settling beside Elena near the fire, his expression carrying a weight she hadn't seen from him before, somewhere between admiration and lingering worry. "What you did today," he said quietly, "it wasn't just power, it was restraint, in the face of overwhelming provocation. That's rarer than the power itself." Elena managed a tired, faint smile. "I nearly lost control entirely." "But you didn't," Draven said firmly. "That matters more than you realize." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the crackling fire the only sound besides the distant rustle of wind through the trees. Eventually, Draven spoke again, his voice quieter, more personal than before. "Thorn's words about my ancestors," he said slowly. "About the crown persecuting your bloodline. I need to know the truth of that history, Elena. Not the sanitized version taught to royal children, but the actual truth, whatever it costs to uncover it." Elena studied his profile in the firelight, the genuine determination etched across his features. "Even if it implicates your own family?" "Especially then," Draven said. "I cannot claim to protect you honestly, while ignoring whatever role my own bloodline played in the persecution of yours." Something warm settled in Elena's chest at his words, a recognition of integrity she hadn't expected to find in a king who had once, without hesitation, ordered her thrown into a dungeon cell. The man beside her now bore little resemblance to that first cold impression, and she found herself grateful, more than she was prepared to fully admit, for whatever had changed between them since that first tense meeting in the dungeon corridor. "Then we'll find the truth together," she said quietly. "Whatever it turns out to be." Draven met her eyes, something unspoken passing between them, warm and steady, despite the exhaustion and danger of the day behind them. Above the quiet campsite, stars emerged slowly across the clearing sky, distant and constant, indifferent to the storm of ancient secrets and modern conflicts unfolding beneath them, though both Elena and Draven understood, without needing to speak it aloud, that Ravenhollow had only been the beginning of a much larger reckoning still waiting to unfold. The journey back to the palace felt different than the ride toward Ravenhollow had been, the tension of uncertainty replaced by a cautious, fragile sense of accomplishment. News of what had happened at Ravenhollow traveled faster than their small party could ride, and by the time they reached the palace gates 2 days later, crowds had already gathered along the roadside, murmuring and staring with open curiosity at the woman, who had reportedly brought an entire courtyard of wolves to their knees. Elena felt the weight of every gaze as they passed through the palace gates, uncertain whether the expressions she saw were fear, awe, or something more complicated entwining both. Draven remained close beside her throughout, a steady, grounding presence amid the overwhelming attention. Once safely within the palace walls, Draven immediately called for a private meeting with his most trusted advisors, determined to address the spy who had betrayed their travel route before any further damage could be done. Elena, exhausted from days of travel and the emotional toll of Ravenhollow, retreated to her chambers, grateful for a few hours of solitude to process everything that had happened. She had barely settled into a chair near the window when a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Lord Ashford, the young alpha who had spoken in her defense during the earlier council meeting, stood at her door, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Lady Elena," he said, offering a respectful bow. "Forgive the intrusion. I wish to speak with you privately, if you're willing." Elena studied him carefully, unsure what to expect, but something in his earnest expression put her at ease. "Of course. Please, come in." He entered hesitantly, glancing around the room, as if uncertain how to begin. "What you did at Ravenhollow," he said finally. "Word has already reached the palace, though I suspect the accounts have grown exaggerated with each retelling." "Some of it is likely true regardless," Elena said quietly. "I made an entire courtyard kneel, without intending to command anyone. I'm not certain that's something to be proud of." "I disagree," Ashford said, surprising her with his directness. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the Luna Prime bloodline, stories passed down through generations of my family, long before Thorn twisted the narrative for his own purposes. She always said the true measure of that bloodline's power wasn't found in the ability to command obedience, but in the restraint shown in choosing not to, except when absolutely necessary." Elena felt a lump form in her throat at his words, an echo of the exact struggle she had wrestled with since the moment her power first surfaced. "Your grandmother sounds like she understood something most people seem to have forgotten." "She did," Ashford said, a faint, sad smile crossing his face. "She passed several years ago, but she always spoke of your bloodline with respect rather than fear. I wanted you to know that not everyone in this kingdom sees you as a threat or a weapon, Lady Elena. Some of us remember the old stories differently." Gratitude swelled in Elena's chest, unexpected and deeply moving. "Thank you, Lord Ashford. That means more than you realize." He bowed once more, before excusing himself, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts, a small but meaningful thread of hope woven through the exhaustion and uncertainty still weighing on her. Later that evening, a servant summoned her to Draven's private study, informing her that the investigation into the spy among their travel party had reached a conclusion. Elena made her way through quiet palace corridors, her stomach tightening with anticipation as she approached the study door. Inside, Draven stood near his desk, expression grim, while a young guard she vaguely recognized from the traveling party knelt before him, hands bound, head bowed in shame. "This is Corwin," Draven said quietly as Elena entered, "one of the guards assigned to our journey." Under questioning, he admitted to informing Thorn's forces of our travel route in exchange for promises of protection for his family, who Thorn's agents had threatened weeks before we departed. Elena studied the young guard, noting the genuine anguish etched across his face, rather than the cold calculation she might have expected from a true traitor.
"He was coerced,"
she said quietly, understanding settling over her. "Coerced or not, his actions nearly cost you your life," Draven said, though his tone carried more weariness than fury. "Please, Your Majesty," Corwin said, voice trembling. "I never intended for anyone to be harmed. Thorn's men threatened my sister, my nephews. I didn't know what else to do." Draven's jaw tightened, clearly torn between the necessity of justice and the recognition of genuine desperation behind the betrayal. Elena stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "May I speak?" she asked quietly. Draven glanced at her, then nodded, stepping back slightly to allow her space. Elena crouched slightly, bringing herself to eye level with the kneeling guard, echoing, without fully realizing it, the same gesture Draven had once made toward her in the dungeon corridor. "Corwin," she said gently, "I understand fear for the people we love. I understand desperation, driving choices we might never make under different circumstances. But you need to understand the danger your choice created, not just for me, but for everyone in that camp who trusted you." "I know," Corwin whispered, tears streaking down his face. "I know, and I'll accept whatever punishment is deemed fair." Elena glanced up at Draven, a silent question passing between them. He studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly, deferring to whatever judgment she intended to offer. "Rather than punishment alone," Elena said, turning back to Corwin, "I would ask that you help us. Use whatever knowledge you have of Thorn's remaining agents within the palace and surrounding territories to help protect others from being coerced the way you were. Your family will be placed under the Crown's protection immediately, removing the leverage Thorn used against you." Corwin looked up, disbelief and gratitude warring across his tear-streaked face. "You would offer me that, after what I did?" "Everyone deserves a chance to make amends," Elena said quietly, "especially when their actions were born from love rather than malice." Draven studied Elena with an expression of quiet, profound respect, something shifting further in the way he looked at her. Admiration layered beneath the growing warmth that had been building steadily between them since their earliest tense encounter in the dungeon. "See that his family receives protection immediately," Draven instructed the remaining guards, "and ensure Corwin's cooperation is documented carefully, should this decision require justification before the council." The guards escorted Corwin out, his gratitude palpable even through his continued distress, leaving Elena and Draven alone in the quiet study. "That was a generous judgment," Draven said softly, once the door closed behind them. "Mercy isn't weakness," Elena said, echoing words she hadn't fully realized she believed until she spoke them aloud. "Sometimes it's the only thing capable of breaking cycles of fear and desperation that people like Thorn exploit." Draven crossed the room slowly, stopping close enough that Elena could feel the warmth radiating from him, the charged tension between them finally free of interruption for the first time since their conversation in the palace corridor days earlier. "You continue to surprise me," he said quietly, reaching up to gently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Is that a good thing?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper, pulse quickening at his closeness. "It's the best thing that has happened to this kingdom in a very long time," Draven said, and before Elena could respond, he leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back if she chose. She didn't. Their lips met gently, warm and unhurried, a quiet culmination of the tension that had been building steadily since that first tense meeting in the dungeon corridor. When they finally parted, Elena felt breathless, her heart pounding with a warmth entirely different from the golden power resting beneath her ribs. "I should have done that days ago," Draven murmured, resting his forehead gently against hers. "I'm glad you waited until now," Elena replied softly, a genuine smile spreading across her face for the first time in what felt like far too long. Outside the study windows, the palace grounds settled into quiet evening stillness, though both of them understood, even amid the warmth of the moment, that Thorn's retreat from Ravenhollow was merely a pause, not a resolution, and that the true reckoning still waited somewhere on the horizon. The following morning, Elena woke feeling lighter than she had in days, the warmth of the previous evening still lingering pleasantly in her chest, despite the uncertainty still hanging over the kingdom. She dressed quickly and made her way to the courtyard for her usual training session with Mabel, finding the old woman already waiting, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You seem different this morning," Mabel observed, studying Elena with sharp, perceptive eyes. "I don't know what you mean," Elena said, though the faint blush warming her cheeks likely betrayed her. "Of course you don't," Mabel said, echoing the same words she had used during their very first conversation in the dungeon, though this time laced with gentle amusement rather than mystery. "Shall we begin?" Their session that morning focused less on raw power and more on subtlety, Mabel teaching Elena to sense the emotional undercurrents of those around her, a skill she explained would prove invaluable as Elena's role within the kingdom continued to evolve. "Command is not the only gift within your bloodline," Mabel explained, guiding Elena through a series of careful breathing exercises. The Luna Prime line was also known for an ability to perceive truth beneath deception, to sense genuine intention beneath spoken words. "It's a subtler skill, but no less important." "Is that how you recognized what I was, back in the dungeon?" Elena asked, curiosity finally overriding her earlier hesitance to ask directly. Mabel's expression grew thoughtful, partly instinct, partly experience. "I've lived a long life, dear, and I've encountered enough deception to recognize authenticity when it stands before me, chained and defiant in a dungeon cell." She smiled softly. "You radiated something even then, something most people spend their lives trying to suppress rather than embrace." As their session concluded, a messenger approached, informing Elena that Draven requested her presence in the palace archives, where he had begun the difficult work of uncovering the true history between the crown and the Luna Prime bloodline. Elena felt a flicker of nervous anticipation as she made her way toward the archives, uncertain what truths awaited her within those ancient records. but resolved to face them regardless of how painful they might prove to be. The palace archives stretched deep beneath the eastern wing, rows of towering shelves filled with ancient tomes, scrolls, and carefully preserved documents chronicling centuries of the kingdom's history. Draven stood at a long wooden table near the center of the room, surrounded by stacks of aged parchment, his expression heavy with a weight Elena hadn't seen from him before. "You found something," she said, approaching the table cautiously. "I found a great deal," Draven said quietly, gesturing toward the scattered documents before him. None of it easy to read. Elena settled into a chair across from him, bracing herself as he began recounting what the ancient records revealed. Nearly 200 years earlier, a king named Aldrich Ashvale, Draven's direct ancestor, had ruled during a period when the Luna Prime bloodline still thrived openly among the kingdom's noble packs, respected and honored as protectors and mediators between rival factions. Aldrich grew increasingly paranoid as his reign progressed, Draven explained, sliding a weathered document across the table toward her. The records suggest he became convinced that the Luna Prime's ability to command obedience from any wolf, regardless of pack loyalty, represented an existential threat to his throne. He feared that a Luna Prime leader, allied with rival nobles, could effectively overthrow him without ever raising a blade. Elena studied the faded ink, her stomach twisting, as she read fragments of Aldrich's own writings, paranoid justifications for what followed. What did he do? Draven's jaw tightened. He orchestrated what the records euphemistically call the Great Consolidation. In reality, it was a systematic campaign to eliminate the Luna Prime bloodline entirely, framing them as dangerous, uncontrollable threats to kingdom stability. Entire family lines were hunted down over the course of several years, their deaths justified through fabricated accusations of treason and rebellion. Elena felt sick, the weight of generations of suffering settling heavily over her chest. How many survived? Officially none, Draven said quietly. The kingdom's records state the bloodline was fully extinguished within a decade of Aldrich's campaign beginning. Clearly, that was not entirely accurate. Someone hid survivors, Elena said, pieces clicking together in her mind. My family. It appears so, Draven confirmed. There are fragmented references here to a small group who fled north, aided by sympathetic packs who disagreed with Aldrich's campaign, but lacked the power to openly oppose him. The trail grows sparse after that, deliberately obscured, likely to protect whoever remained. Elena sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of what she was learning. Her entire life, the constant moving, the guardians who never explained themselves, the collar placed on her the moment she was captured, all of it stemmed from a persecution that had begun 2 centuries earlier, orchestrated by the very bloodline now sitting across the table from her, working to uncover the truth alongside her. Draven, she said quietly, you don't have to feel responsible for what Aldrich did. That was generations before you were even born. I know that logically, Draven said, his voice rough with genuine emotion. But I wear his crown, Elena. I rule from the throne he secured, through the persecution of your family. Pretending that history doesn't touch me simply because I wasn't alive to commit those acts myself feels like its own form of dishonesty. Elena reached across the table, gently covering his hand with hers. Then don't pretend it doesn't touch you. Use that weight to make certain nothing like it happens again. Draven turned his hand beneath hers, lacing their fingers together, his amber eyes meeting hers with an intensity that carried both grief and quiet determination. I intend to, he said. I want to formally acknowledge what Aldrich did, publicly, before the full council. Not to seek forgiveness for actions I didn't commit, but to ensure the truth is no longer buried, the way it has been for 2 centuries. That's a significant risk, Elena said carefully. Some nobles, like Hendrix, built their power on the very system Aldrich created. They won't welcome that truth being spoken aloud. No, Draven agreed. They won't. But continuing to hide it only perpetuates the same injustice that nearly erased your bloodline entirely. I won't be complicit in that silence any longer. Elena studied his resolve, admiration swelling warmly in her chest alongside the lingering grief of everything she had just learned. Then I'll stand beside you when you make that announcement, she said. Whatever the consequences. Draven brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles, the gesture carrying more weight than words could have conveyed. Thank you, he said softly, for trusting me with this. despite everything my bloodline has cost yours. I trust you, Elena said, and she realized, as she spoke the words, just how deeply true they had become in the short time since her chains had first been removed. Not because of your crown, but because of who you've chosen to be despite it. They remained in the archives long into the evening, Draven continuing to sift through records while Elena absorbed fragments of history that reshaped her understanding of everything she had believed about her past. As the candles burned low and exhaustion finally began pulling at both of them, Draven set aside the final document with a weary sigh. There's one more thing, he said quietly, retrieving a small, weathered locket from among the scattered papers. This was found among records related to the survivors who fled north. I believe it may have belonged to your family. Elena took the locket with trembling hands, opening it carefully to reveal a tiny portrait inside, faded but still visible, depicting a woman with warm brown eyes and dark hair, remarkably similar to the face that had haunted her dreams for years. That's her, Elena whispered, tears filling her eyes. That's the woman from my dreams, my mother. Draven watched her quietly, allowing her the space to process the overwhelming discovery without interruption. Elena traced the faded portrait gently, the melody her mother had once sung rising unbidden in her memory, no longer just a fragment of a forgotten dream, but a tangible connection to a past finally beginning to take shape. Thank you, she said softly, looking up at Draven through tear-filled eyes, for finding this, for not hiding from the truth, no matter how difficult it was to uncover. You deserve to know where you came from, Draven said gently. Whatever that truth costs either of us. Elena closed the locket carefully, holding it against her chest, feeling for the first time since her guardians first began moving her from town to town years ago, a genuine sense of connection to a history that was truly, undeniably her own. The following day, Draven called for a full council session, gathering every noble alpha within the kingdom's reach to hear his announcement regarding Aldrich's history. Elena stood beside him at the front of the great hall, the locket resting securely beneath her collar, a quiet source of strength as she faced the same skeptical gathering that had first questioned her legitimacy days earlier. I have summoned you here, Draven began, his voice carrying clearly across the crowded hall, to address a truth long buried within this kingdom's history. Nearly 2 centuries ago, my ancestor, King Aldrich Ashvale, orchestrated the systematic persecution of the Luna Prime bloodline, framing innocent families as traitors to justify their destruction. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gathered nobles, shock evident on many faces, though Elena noted a few, including Lord Hendrix, who remained conspicuously composed, as if the revelation carried less surprise for them than for others. I share this truth not to seek absolution for actions I did not commit, Draven continued, but because continued silence only perpetuates the injustice done to Elena's family, and to every family who suffered under Aldrich's campaign. Going forward, this kingdom will formally acknowledge that history, and I intend to establish new protections, ensuring no bloodline is ever again persecuted for the power they carry, rather than the actions they choose. Hendrix stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral despite the challenge evident in his tone. A noble sentiment, Your Majesty, but surely you understand that dismantling the very systems Aldrich's consolidation established would destabilize power structures many noble pacts, including my own, have relied upon for generations. Stability built upon historical injustice is not stability worth preserving, Lord Hendrix, Draven replied evenly. I would rather lead a kingdom built on honest foundations than continue benefiting from lies simply because they've become comfortable. Elena watched the exchange with growing admiration, recognizing the political risk Draven was willingly accepting for the sake of a truth that could easily have remained buried indefinitely. Several younger alphas, including Lord Ashford, nodded in visible support, while older, more established nobles exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncertain how this revelation might reshape the careful balance of power they had long depended upon. There is also the matter, Draven continued, of Garrick Thorne, who has used fragments of this same history to justify his own rebellion, twisting genuine injustice into a tool for personal ambition. I do not intend to let him claim ownership of a truth that belongs to every family harmed by Aldrich's campaign, including Elena's. The council session continued for hours, debate flowing back and forth between nobles cautiously supportive of Draven's transparency, and others deeply resistant to any restructuring of established power. Through it all, Elena remained steady beside Draven, occasionally speaking when directly addressed, her presence alone serving as living proof that the history Draven revealed carried consequences far beyond abstract political discussion. By the time the session finally concluded, no clear resolution had been reached, though the seeds of genuine change had unmistakably been planted, cracking open a silence that had persisted for nearly 2 centuries. As the nobles dispersed, Elena found herself standing alone with Draven in the emptying hall, both of them exhausted from the weight of the day's revelations and debates. "That went about as well as I expected," Draven said with a tired but genuine smile. "You were remarkable," Elena said softly. "Not every king would risk that kind of instability for the sake of truth. Not every king had someone like you to remind him why the truth matters more than comfortable silence," Draven replied, reaching for her hand. Elena laced her fingers with his, grateful beyond words for the steady partnership that had grown between them since that first tense meeting in the dungeon corridor, though she understood, even amid the warmth of the moment, that Thorn remained a looming threat, and that his response to today's council revelations would likely not be long in coming. In the days following the council session, word of Draven's public acknowledgement spread rapidly throughout the kingdom, sparking conversations in villages and noble halls alike, some grateful for the long-overdue honesty, others uneasy about what changes might follow. Amid the growing political tension, Elena received an unexpected visitor one quiet afternoon, while resting in the palace gardens. A woman approached hesitantly, elderly and weathered, her silver hair pulled back in a simple braid, eyes carrying a mixture of caution and deep emotion as she studied Elena from a respectful distance. "Forgive my intrusion," the woman said softly. "My name is Greta. I served as a healer in a small village north of here many years ago. I believe I once cared for your mother." Elena's breath caught, rising quickly from her seat. "You knew my mother?" Greta nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I did. Her name was Lyra. She and her husband, Aldwin, arrived in our village nearly 24 years ago, fleeing something they never fully explained, though the fear in their eyes told its own story. Lyra was pregnant with you at the time." Elena guided Greta to a nearby bench, sitting close beside her, hungry for every fragment of information the old healer could offer. "Please," she said, "tell me everything you remember." Greta's expression grew distant, memory pulling her back through the years. "Your parents kept mostly to themselves, though Lyra had a warmth about her that drew people in, despite her caution. She used to sing while she worked in the village garden, a beautiful melody I never heard anywhere else, before or since." Tears filled Elena's eyes, as the melody from her dreams echoed softly in her memory. "I remember that song," she whispered, even though I couldn't remember her face until recently. "She loved you fiercely," Greta continued gently. "I remember the night you were born, how she held you and wept, not from pain, but from a fear I didn't understand at the time. She kept saying, 'They'll come for her eventually. We have to be ready.'" "What happened to them?" Elena asked, though dread already coiled tight in her stomach. Greta's expression grew heavy with old grief. "When you were barely a year old, riders arrived in our village, asking questions about strangers who had settled there recently. Your parents recognized the danger immediately. Aldwin arranged for you to be taken that very night, entrusted to a network of guardians sworn to protect Luna Prime descendants, while he and Lyra stayed behind to mislead the riders, buying time for your escape." Elena's throat tightened painfully. "They sacrificed themselves. They gave their lives so you could live freely, even if that freedom meant growing up without them," Greta said softly, reaching out to gently squeeze Elena's hand. "I've carried the guilt of not being able to save them for over 2 decades. When I heard the rumors spreading about a Luna Prime descendant standing beside the Alpha King, I knew, somehow, it had to be you. I had to see for myself, to finally share what I witnessed all those years ago." Elena wept quietly, the weight of finally understanding the full truth of her origins, settling over her with a mixture of profound grief and unexpected peace. Her parents hadn't abandoned her, hadn't died from some ordinary tragedy as she had always been told. They had loved her enough to sacrifice everything, ensuring she survived even when they could not. "Thank you," Elena said finally, once she found her voice again, "for remembering them, for finding me, so I could finally know the truth. They would be proud of you, Greta said, tears streaking down her weathered face. The woman I see before me carries their strength and their courage in every part of who you've become. They sat together for a long while, Elena asking every question she could think to ask, absorbing every fragment of memory Greta could offer about the parents she had never truly known. By the time evening began settling over the gardens, Elena felt a profound shift within herself, the final missing pieces of her identity, finally settling into place, painful and beautiful in equal measure. Later that evening, she found Draven in his private study, and without a word, crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, needing the comfort of his steady presence after the emotional weight of the day's revelations. He held her close, sensing immediately that something significant had shifted within her. I met someone today who knew my parents, she said softly against his chest. I finally know what happened to them. Draven pulled back slightly, studying her face with gentle concern. Are you all right? I will be, Elena said, offering a small, genuine smile despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am, and where I came from. That's worth more than I ever imagined it could be, even amid the grief. Draven pressed a gentle kiss against her forehead, holding her close, as the last light of evening faded beyond the study windows. Whatever else lies ahead, he murmured, you will never have to carry that truth alone again. Elena closed her eyes, resting against him, grateful beyond measure for the steady partnership they had built together, even as she understood, deep within her heart, that Thorn's silence since Ravenhollow was unlikely to last much longer, and that the true final confrontation still waited somewhere on the horizon, drawing steadily closer with each passing day. 3 days later, a royal scout returned from the northern border, with grim news that shattered the fragile calm that had settled over the palace since the council session. Thorn had used the days following Ravenhollow not to retreat quietly, but to rally further support, twisting Draven's public acknowledgement of Aldrich's crimes into fresh fuel for his rebellion, claiming the confession proved the crown could never be trusted to protect Luna Prime interests genuinely. He's gathered nearly 500 wolves now, the scout reported grimly, standing before Draven and his assembled advisors in the war room, including several noble packs who broke away following the council session, unconvinced by your majesty's promises of reform. Elena felt her stomach tighten as she listened, understanding the painful irony that the very transparency meant to heal old wounds had also handed Thorn additional justification for his growing rebellion.
How long before he moves against the palace directly?
She asked. Our estimates suggest within the fortnight, the scout replied. He's positioning forces along the northern trade routes, likely intending to cut off palace supply lines before attempting a direct assault. Draven's expression hardened with the calculating focus Elena had come to recognize as his readiness for difficult decisions. Then we cannot simply wait for him to strike first, he said. We need allies, packs willing to stand openly with the crown, rather than remain cautiously neutral. Lord Ashford's pack has already pledged support, one advisor offered. Several smaller northern packs, disillusioned with Thorn's increasingly aggressive tactics, have also sent quiet inquiries about potential alliance. Send formal invitations, Draven instructed. I want every pack willing to stand against Thorn's rebellion, gathered here within the week, presenting a unified front before he can strike. As the War Council continued strategizing long into the evening, Elena found herself increasingly drawn into the practical realities of what lay ahead, no longer simply a symbol caught between opposing forces, but an active participant shaping the kingdom's response to the looming conflict. Mabel remained close throughout these discussions, offering quiet guidance whenever Elena's uncertainty threatened to overwhelm her growing confidence. You've changed remarkably in these past weeks, Mabel observed one evening, as they walked together through the quiet palace gardens after another long day of preparation. I don't feel like the same person who arrived here in chains, Elena admitted. Sometimes I barely recognize myself. That's not loss, dear, Mabel said gently. That's growth. The woman who arrived here believed herself powerless, wolfless, insignificant. The woman standing before me now understands her strength, her history, and her capacity to shape the future rather than simply survive it. Elena considered Mabel's words carefully, recognizing the truth within them, even as uncertainty about the coming conflict continued weighing heavily on her thoughts. I'm afraid of what's coming, she admitted quietly. Fear is reasonable, given what lies ahead, Mabel said. But you are no longer facing it as the frightened girl dragged into a dungeon cell weeks ago. You face it now, as someone who has already proven, more than once, that she can meet overwhelming danger with control, rather than panic. Elena drew strength from Mabel's steady confidence, though the knot of anxiety in her stomach refused to fully unwind as the days passed, and the palace steadily transformed into a gathering point for allied packs preparing for whatever confrontation Thorn intended to force upon them. 1 week later, the palace grounds had transformed into a gathering of allied forces, banners from a dozen different packs flying alongside the royal crest, wolves of every rank training together in preparation for the confrontation everyone knew was coming. Elena spent her mornings continuing her training with Mabel, her afternoons assisting with strategic planning alongside Draven and his advisors, and her evenings finding brief, precious moments of quiet connection with Draven amid the mounting tension. The blow, when it finally came, arrived not as the direct assault everyone had prepared for, but as something far more personal and devastating. Elena woke abruptly one night, to the sound of shouting echoing through the palace corridors, followed by the sharp, unmistakable scent of smoke drifting beneath her chamber door. She rushed out into the hallway to find guards running toward the eastern wing, faces etched with alarm. "What's happening?" she demanded, catching one guard by the arm. "The archives," he said breathlessly. Someone set fire to the archives, and Mabel was seen entering shortly before the flames started. Elena's heart lurched violently. Is she still inside? The guard's grim expression provided her answer before he even spoke. "We believe so." The fire spread too quickly for anyone to reach the deeper sections safely. Elena didn't wait for further explanation. She ran toward the eastern wing, ignoring the guards' shouted warnings, the golden warmth beneath her ribs surging urgently as fear and desperation overtook her. She reached the archive entrance to find flames already consuming much of the outer chamber, thick smoke billowing into the corridor. "Elena, wait!" Draven's voice called out behind her, but she had already pressed forward, using every ounce of control Mabel had taught her to focus the golden light gathering beneath her skin into something protective, a shimmering barrier that pushed back the worst of the smoke and heat as she pressed deeper into the burning archives. She found Mabel collapsed near the back shelves, unconscious but breathing, a fallen beam pinning her leg beneath its weight. Elena's pulse pounded as she summoned every bit of strength she possessed, golden light flaring bright enough to briefly illuminate the entire smoke-filled chamber as she lifted the beam enough to free the old woman. Draven arrived moments later, immediately helping Elena carry Mabel back through the burning corridor to safety, both of them coughing violently from smoke inhalation by the time they finally reached clean air outside the archive entrance. Healers rushed forward immediately, tending to Mabel's injuries while Elena collapsed to her knees, adrenaline finally draining from her exhausted body. "She's breathing steadily," a healer confirmed after a tense examination. "The leg injury will require time to heal, but she survived." Relief washed over Elena, though it was quickly replaced by fury as understanding settled over what had just occurred. "This wasn't an accident," she said, looking up at Draven, whose expression carried the same grim certainty. "No," he agreed. "This was Thorn, striking at what he perceived as your greatest source of guidance and strength, hoping to weaken you before whatever assault he intends next." As if summoned by the very thought, a horn sounded from the northern watchtowers, sharp and urgent, followed swiftly by shouts of alarm, rippling through the gathered allied forces camped across the palace grounds. "They're here," a guard confirmed, rushing toward Draven with visible alarm. "Thorn's forces are approaching from the north, hundreds of them, moving fast." Draven's expression hardened into fierce, focused resolve. "Rally the allied packs immediately," he ordered. "This ends tonight." Elena rose unsteadily to her feet, smoke still burning in her lungs. Grief and fury tangled together as she thought of Mabel's injuries, of everything Thorn had cost her, and this kingdom already. She reached instinctively for the golden warmth beneath her ribs, finding it responding readily now, steady and powerful, no longer uncertain or unpracticed. "I'm coming with you," she said, meeting Draven's eyes with unwavering determination. He studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between protective instinct and recognition of her right to stand alongside him in whatever confrontation awaited. Finally he nodded. "Together then." They moved quickly toward the assembling forces, Elena's mind racing through everything Mabel had taught her over the past weeks, preparing herself for whatever confrontation Thorn intended to force upon the palace grounds that night. The Allied forces gathered swiftly along the palace's northern approach, hundreds of wolves shifting into their true forms, moonlight glinting off fur and fangs, as Thorn's rebellion finally came into view across the open field separating the two forces. Torches illuminated the rebel ranks, banners bearing the broken circle emblem snapping sharply in the night wind. Thorn himself stood at the front of his gathered forces, already shifted into a massive gray wolf form, eyes glowing with cold determination, as he faced the palace's defenders across the darkened field. Draven stepped forward, shifting into his own powerful black wolf form, standing resolutely at the front of the allied packs, Elena remaining close beside him in human form, golden light already tracing faintly beneath her skin as she prepared herself for whatever violence the coming moments would bring. "Thorn," Draven's voice carried across the field, resonant with authority despite his wolf form somehow allowing speech through sheer force of will and old magic. Few wolves retained the strength to summon. "This ends tonight, one way or another." Thorn's answering growl rippled with fury and desperation. "You're right about that, Your Majesty, though perhaps not the ending you anticipate." With that, the rebel forces surged forward, and the long-anticipated battle for the future of the kingdom finally erupted across the moonlit field. Chaos erupted across the field as the two forces collided, snarls and howls filling the night air, the clash of claws and teeth mixing with the shouts of guards wielding steel alongside their shifted comrades. Elena stayed close to the edge of the fighting, watching for any opening where her abilities could turn the tide without causing needless harm to wolves who might yet be swayed away from Thorn's cause, rather than destroyed entirely. Draven fought with fierce, controlled ferocity, his black wolf form cutting through the rebel front lines, with the practiced skill of a warrior who had spent his entire life preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. Yet even his considerable strength found itself tested as Thorn's forces pressed forward with desperate, coordinated intensity, clearly determined to overwhelm the palace's defenders through sheer numbers. A group of rebel wolves broke away from the main fighting, circling wide toward Elena's position, clearly recognizing her as a priority target despite the surrounding chaos. She felt fear spike through her chest as three wolves converged, but she forced herself to remember Mabel's teachings, breathing steadily, reaching for the golden warmth, rather than letting panic overwhelm her control. "Stop," she commanded, voice carrying the same layered resonance that had brought an entire courtyard to its knees at Ravenhollow. The three wolves faltered instantly, legs buckling beneath the weight of her authority, though their eyes remained fierce with resistance, clearly wolves deeply loyal to Thorn's cause, rather than simply following orders reluctantly. Elena felt the strain of holding them in place, aware that pure command alone would not be enough to end this conflict without further devastating losses on both sides. "I don't want to hurt you," she said, lowering her voice slightly, letting genuine compassion color her words rather than pure command. "Whatever grievances drove you to follow Thorn, I understand them. But this violence will not fix what's broken. Please, stand down." One of the wolves, a smaller gray female, whimpered softly, her aggressive posture slowly easing, despite the compulsion still holding her in place. Elena felt the shift, subtle but genuine, and released her hold gently, rather than forcing continued submission. The gray wolf backed away slowly, clearly torn, before finally retreating from the fighting entirely, disappearing into the tree line rather than continuing to fight. The remaining two wolves, after a tense moment of hesitation, followed suit, leaving Elena breathing hard but unharmed, as the immediate threat dissolved. Across the field, the battle raged fiercely, Allied forces slowly gaining ground against Thorn's rebellion, as more wolves, witnessing Elena's restraint and the genuine choice she offered rather than blind subjugation, began defecting from the rebel ranks entirely. Word spread quickly across the chaotic battlefield, wolves calling out to their comrades, urging them to reconsider their loyalty to a cause increasingly defined by desperation rather than genuine justice. Thorn, sensing his forces beginning to waver, fought with increasingly reckless fury, pressing directly toward Draven's position, with singular, desperate focus. The two alphas collided in a violent clash of claws and teeth, the ground churning beneath their struggle, as centuries of accumulated grievance and ambition finally reached their breaking point. Elena watched in horror as Thorn managed to land a vicious blow, sending Draven crashing hard against the ground, blood staining his dark fur. Thorn loomed over him, jaws poised for a killing strike, and Elena felt something inside her shatter, with desperate, overwhelming urgency.
No!
She screamed, and the golden light erupting from her skin this time surpassed anything she had summoned before, a brilliant wave of ancient power rippling outward across the entire battlefield with overwhelming force. Every wolf on the field, rebel and ally alike, felt the crushing weight of her command, bodies buckling to the ground simultaneously, weapons clattering from stunned hands. Thorn himself froze mid-strike, his massive gray form trembling with the effort of resisting an authority far beyond anything he had ever encountered, his jaws hovering mere inches from Draven's exposed throat. "Enough," Elena said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent battlefield with absolute, undeniable authority. "This war ends now." Thorn's body shook violently, fury and disbelief warring across his lupine features, as his own instincts betrayed him, forcing him backward away from Draven, despite everything in him screaming to finish the strike. Slowly, painfully, he shifted back into human form, kneeling on the churned battlefield earth, breathing hard, defeated in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength. "How?" he gasped, staring up at Elena with something between fury and grudging awe. "How is your power still growing?" "Because I finally understand what it's meant to protect," Elena said, her voice steady, despite the trembling exhaustion coursing through her limbs. "Not a throne, not a bloodline's pride, but the people caught between them, who never asked for any of this." Draven shifted back to human form slowly, wincing from his injuries but very much alive, rising unsteadily to stand beside Elena as the battlefield remained frozen beneath her overwhelming command. "Thorn," he said, voice hoarse but firm, "your rebellion ends here. Whether that ending includes your life depends entirely on the choice you make in the next few moments." Thorn's eyes flickered between Draven and Elena, the fight finally draining from his posture as the reality of his defeat settled fully over him. "What choice do I have left?" he asked bitterly. "Surrender," Elena said. "Face judgment for the lives lost tonight, but also help us build something better than what either Aldrich's persecution or your rebellion ever offered. A kingdom where power serves people, rather than the reverse." Thorn stared at her for a long, tense moment, calculating something behind his cold gray eyes before, finally, his shoulders slumped in genuine, exhausted defeat. "I yield," he said quietly, the words clearly costing him more than physical surrender ever could. Across the battlefield, Elena felt the collective tension of held breath finally begin to release, as she gently eased her hold over the assembled wolves, allowing them to rise slowly, uncertainly, the immediate threat of continued violence, finally, genuinely fading into the cool night air. The rebellion that had threatened to fracture the kingdom for weeks ended not with total destruction, but with a fragile, hard-won peace, built upon the very restraint and compassion Elena had fought so hard to maintain throughout everything that had led to this moment. In the weeks following the battle, the kingdom slowly began healing from the wounds of division that had nearly torn it apart. Thorn, true to his surrender, cooperated fully with the council's judgment, ultimately sentenced to years of service rebuilding the very northern territories his rebellion had destabilized, a punishment tempered with the possibility of genuine redemption rather than pure vengeance. Mabel recovered steadily from her injuries, though she insisted on continuing Elena's training, even while confined to a wheelchair during the initial weeks of healing, declaring stubbornly that a broken leg was hardly sufficient reason to abandon such important work. Elena visited her daily, grateful beyond words that the old seer's sacrifice in trying to protect the archives had not cost her life entirely. Lord Ashford's pack, along with several others who had stood firmly with the crown throughout the conflict, found themselves elevated within the kingdom's restructured council, their loyalty rewarded with genuine influence rather than empty gratitude. Even Lord Hendricks, forced to reckon with the undeniable proof of Elena's power and the genuine support she commanded from wolves across every rank, grudgingly began extending cautious cooperation rather than open resistance. Elena spent her days now dividing her time between continued training with Mabel, growing involvement in the kingdom's political restructuring, and quiet, precious moments with Draven amid the demands of rebuilding a fractured kingdom. The formal acknowledgement of Aldrich's historical crimes evolved into genuine policy, new protections established to ensure no bloodline could ever again be persecuted for power rather than actions. A legacy Elena knew her parents would have been proud to witness, even from wherever their sacrifice had carried them. One quiet evening, months after the battle that had finally ended Thorn's rebellion, Draven found Elena in the same palace garden where Greta had first shared the truth of her parents' sacrifice. The autumn air carried a gentle chill, stars beginning to emerge across the darkening sky, as she sat quietly on the familiar bench, the locket containing her mother's portrait resting comfortably around her neck. "I've been looking for you," Draven said, settling beside her, close enough that his warmth chased away the evening chill. "Just thinking," Elena said softly, leaning into him naturally, the closeness between them now, as familiar and comfortable as anything she had known in her life. "About everything that's changed since that night in the dungeon." "A great deal has changed," Draven agreed, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders. "Most of it, I think, for the better." Elena smiled, turning to study his face in the fading evening light. "I never imagined finding a family beyond the guardians who raised me. Yet somehow, between you, Mabel, and even Lord Ashford's stubborn loyalty, I feel like I've found exactly that." "Speaking of family," Draven said, a note of careful hesitation entering his voice that immediately drew Elena's attention. He reached into his coat, withdrawing a small velvet box that made her breath catch instantly. "I know we've both faced enough upheaval to last several lifetimes already, but I find myself unwilling to wait any longer to ask you something I've been certain of since that very first night in the dungeon corridor, even before I understood why." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring, its band etched with delicate wolf and moon designs that echoed the ancient legends surrounding her bloodline. "Elena Voss," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability evident in his amber eyes. "Will you stand beside me, not just as an ally, or a partner in rebuilding this kingdom, but as my wife, my equal in every sense of the word?" Tears filled Elena's eyes as she studied the ring, the culmination of everything they had endured together settling warmly over her heart. "Yes," she said softly, then more firmly, "Yes, Draven, I will." He slipped the ring gently onto her finger, then pulled her close, sealing the promise with a kiss that carried none of the uncertainty or hesitation of their very first tentative moment together, only steady, unwavering certainty about the future they intended to build together. Their coronation and wedding, held together as a single grand ceremony months later, drew representatives from every pack across the kingdom, including several northern territories once loyal to Thorn's rebellion, now extending cautious but genuine support toward the new era Draven and Elena represented. Mabel, fully healed and walking steadily once more, stood proudly among the honored guests, her sharp eyes glistening with unmistakable pride as she watched the young woman she had guided through those early, uncertain days finally step into her full, rightful power. As Elena stood beside Draven before the assembled crowd, golden light tracing softly beneath her skin, no longer summoned through fear or danger, but through the simple, steady confidence of someone finally, fully secure in who she was, she found herself remembering the frightened, chained prisoner who had first stumbled into this kingdom's dungeons weeks earlier, believing herself wolfless, powerless, insignificant. That woman had been wrong about nearly everything she believed about herself, and Elena had never been more grateful for a mistake in her entire life. The crowd gathered before them knelt, not from compelled authority, but from genuine respect and hope for the future their new queen represented. Wolves from every pack finally united, not through fear or force, but through the shared understanding that true strength lay not in domination, but in the courage to choose compassion, even when cruelty would have been far easier. Draven took her hand, lacing their fingers together as they turned to face their unified kingdom, and Elena felt, for the first time in her entire life, that she had finally, truly found her way home.